Morning, good afternoon, good evening to some people, depending on where in the world you're coming from. Welcome to our new webinar series called Inspiring Stories. And this is our take in Southampton Business School on reconnecting with our alumni and bringing them together with our students. And over the coming months, we're going to be charting the inspiring stories of some of our more notable alumni. I'm Dr. Rob Angell. I'm an associate professor in marketing at Southampton Business School, and I'm also director of internationalisation. And I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Philip Alford, who is the director of CEPAR and is also part of my department. We are delighted for you to be joining us, and we have a really healthy mix of alumni and students who've joined us on the call. This is going to be a very relaxed, enjoyable, calm, but insightful experience. And we're going to be hearing about the life experiences of Mr. Jason Marceau, one of our alums from the Business Analytics and Management Sciences Master's degree several years ago. There's going to be an opportunity for you to write comments and questions for Jason to answer, and we'll pick those up as we go through. There's also going to be some quite candid discussion about Jason's life until now. So I'd ask you to take off or mute your microphones and also your webcams and listen to Jason and his story. Thanks for joining us, Jason.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rob. Very excited to be here, and always happy to share my story and experience at Southampton. It really was a pivotal moment in my life, as we'll get into in a little bit.
Great stuff. Now, we're really interested in knowing where people are joining us from and whether they're alums or if they're current students. So at this moment in time, I think there's a little quick poll that's going to appear on your screen, if you wouldn't mind just answering that, so we can reflect on that in just a second. Now, as you can probably gather from Jason's accent, it's slightly different to mine. And that's because Jason's joining us today from the East Coast in the USA. Jason, start from the beginning. Tell us where you were born, where you grew up, and your life story in those sort of early years.
Sure. So the beginning actually starts over there. I was born in Montrose, Scotland. So the riddle is, right, I was born in Scotland. I've got a French last name and an American accent. So my father was actually stationed at RAF Edsall. And for those that don't know, it was a base up north in Scotland that was leased by the U.S. military. It was a spy base that's now been declassified. So I was born in the UK. I moved back to Washington, D.C. at a very early age. Interestingly, because of that, I have a Scottish birth certificate. I do hold dual citizenship between the U.S. and the UK. So grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. My parents did split up very early. I was raised by my mother. And she was actually one of the inspiring forces in my life, having a single parent that has to always keep moving forward and making sure that things are taken care of. It very much instilled a work ethic and a early behavior in me of, you get knocked down, you get back up and you keep going. And so that's life. So, I went to Virginia Tech for my undergrad. And then I came back to the Washington, D.C. area and went to work for a telecommunications company, and then ultimately into the software domain. I did have a rise relatively early in my career. By my mid-30s, I was the chief operating officer of a software company. And on one side, while that came with great, professional, pleasure and reward, it also at the same time came with a lot of sacrifice and even some, reflection on, what direction, right, do you want to take in terms of a life, right? And, one thing that I can certainly say is, many people look, I think, at executive roles and they always see well, this person's in a position of, influence, or, oh, they may have a certain title or direction, but often that comes at a great cost, right? And, that's time, right? What is your time worth in your life for your family or things that you want to do? And I very much reached that point where I started to have that reflection of, is that next dollar and that next hour of my time, what is that worth, and what do I really want to be doing? And so, that led me up to, that moment of, okay, here's the things that I enjoy about my life and career. Here's the things that I don't. And I started looking at going back to school here in the Washington, D.C. area. I always enjoyed, I would say, measuring things. And that was one of the things about the operations role that I enjoyed, right? Was you measure something, you find improvements. And analytics, right? We were just being this was probably, 2013, 2014, bombarded, right? With analytics and use of analytics starting to really get a big push. And I started looking at some of the universities in the area. And for those that don't know, the cost of school has escalated exponentially in the US. And so a 1 year's master's program at like George Washington University here in the city, almost $50,000 for the year. And so as I started to look at this, I said, well, if I'm going to do this, opportunity cost aside of not working, what greater value is there out there? And I started thinking back to, I've always wanted to live overseas and have, an experience that was much more global, much more impactful. And so I started looking at universities in the UK. And that led me to Southampton, through that process. So I'd say that's kind of the early moments, right, of the summarization of my life up to making a decision to go to Southampton.
I'm really interested in understanding, though, if we just step back a second into that first major role that you took. Now, you've obviously stressed the amount of work that you were doing and how that looked. But I sort of want to understand a little bit more about how that was. I mean, was that part of your journey? Had you aspired into that particular role? And what kind of person and what kind of employee were you at that point?
Yep. So to give a little bit of insight of how I got into that role, the company I was with got acquired. There was some of the executive and senior leadership that left as part of the acquisition. And there was an opportunity for me to step up and take over a portfolio. Well, the portfolio that I took over was running at like negative 88% gross margin. It was hemorrhaging money. Interestingly at the time, my peer, the portfolio that he inherited was at like, a positive 42% gross margin. So he was on autopilot, whereas I didn't sleep. And so when I look back, though, I actually got the better deal. And what I mean by that was he had no challenge to solve. I had to solve the challenge of restoring that portfolio back to, a positive gross margin and profitability. And in doing so, in less than a year, not only the lessons learned, but it made me very visible, right, to the executive leadership in the company. And because of that, there was then another opportunity that said, well, hey, you did a great job at fixing this. We want you to go over here and fix that. So that then led to a vice president role. And then ultimately it said, okay, well, you've really got a handle on this. Can you help us now chart, a direction based on your understanding of things from the operations side? So sure. So it created that rapid progression, but it all started with, I was given the biggest problem and at the time, I felt like, I'm doomed, right? Like I got the short straw, but the reality of it was, had that not happened, I wouldn't have seen that path progress. At the same time, it wouldn't have challenged me to the same level because taking over something that is functioning operationally and you're making incremental improvements is much different than a fix-it situation.
Yeah, so I guess you're having to work extremely long hours.
That's an understatement.
What did it look like? What did it kind of look like for you, your general week there?
Oh, I mean, 7 days a week. I mean, there was at one point I hadn't had any time off in almost 2 years, literally. And so, you know, at the beginning of that, you're highly motivated to be able to solve a challenge, prove to everybody you can do it, but also to yourself. But what starts to come on the end of that, right, is you haven't spent time with friends, family, you know, impacts on relationships. I would have never believed any of that had I not lived it. Especially like corporate burnout. I used to hear this story, right? And I'm like, yeah, you know, you just got to push through, right? It goes back to what I mentioned about my mother, right? Which is you don't have a choice. You have to keep moving forward. But it does. It starts to take a toll, right, on you. And you start to wonder what is all this worth, right? In terms of professional success when it's taking away at such an order of magnitude from your private and personal life.
Okay. How long did that go on for? How long did that sort of continue?
Oh, that went on for about 3 or 4 years.
And then
it was like, something's got to give here. And that's when I thought about, you know, what do I want to do? And I couldn't, I was trying to find what that next path was from the career standpoint, but that's when I started to go down and say, well, you know, I knew where there were some, I guess, some gaps, right, in my own knowledge. And I also kind of looked at the company and said, you know, I don't agree long-term where they're going. Technology, right? Things like cloud computing, analytics, all of these things were coming to bear in the market. And this company wasn't proceeding down that path. I knew it was time to leave. What I needed to go do was the hard part to figure out. And I started to look at the universities and think, well, I need to somewhat retool myself. Right. And, you know, it's the old saying, right? It's not the strongest or the smartest that survive. It's those that adapt. I knew that I needed to adapt. I just didn't know how. But as I started down the road of looking at going back to school, I actually looked at it as this would be a nice sabbatical to go recharge, learn something new that I can bring back and drive my career forward. And at the same time, that's when I started to think bigger about it, right? Which is if you're going to do this, you know, go big. And so that's where it started guiding me towards, you know, looking at overseas in England to go back to school.
So I guess that your path to this point is actually fairly unique. Most of our students may not have trodden a similar path to this particular point, but I think many of our students and alums can identify with the where do I go? So what's
oh, absolutely.
From this sort of universe of different opportunities and different places, I go, why Southampton? What stood out for you about Southampton?
Well, a couple of things. First, the diversity, or the rating of the school and the program. That was really the anchor. But you know, there's a lot of other good programs, right, in the UK. So as I started to compare the international footprint that was there, because that tied back to one of my goals of, you know, building a global network, meeting friends, right, and getting ideas from different perspectives around the world. And then, you know, within our program, BAMS, it was the summer project, because I knew the value, right, of the applied. You know, the academics, great, but the world doesn't play out like that on the field always. And so to take what you've learned, right, inside a company and apply it, I just knew the value of that. And so to me, that really set things, to be honest, there was no comparison at that point, because that in and of itself, I knew was of the greatest value. So when first of all, you know, I was, you know, in my 38 or 39 at this point, and I was like, yeah, I haven't been in school in, you know, what, I don't know, 18 years. So I'm like, I don't even know if I'm going to get accepted. But you know, I was pleasantly surprised when I got my acceptance, and in my mind at that point, I said, that's it. This is it. I'm doing this. But that was I would say, the components of Southampton. The other thing, and this was just for me, you know, I did look at universities in London, and I felt that Southampton had everything that I wanted, but it didn't have the busyness of London, and I would say a distraction, right? I felt that it was conducive more to focusing on studying, and then it was a good base of operations to go do things from there.
Great stuff. Philip.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So really fascinating, Jason. I'm going to pick up kind of on the second leg of your journey, but just before I do that, I'll just introduce myself briefly. So Dr. Philip Alford, the same department as Rob in digital and data-driven marketing. So everything about analytics is absolutely front and center for what we do. But more recently, I took on a role, and I think it's very interesting what you said about the summer project. And the role I just took on is careers, employability, placements, and alumni relations. And that's a bit of a mouthful, but obviously it covers all of those areas around employability. And just exactly what you said, Jason, totally 100% is that, lots and lots of theory, yes, but as you say, it doesn't always play out like that in the field. Not all that all important opportunity to put things into practice and test what you know, and that kind of iterative process. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. I think first and foremost, how that sort of shaped your study and your experience of Southampton. And then I guess more broadly, Jason, I guess, the social side. I appreciate you didn't go to London because you didn't want to be partying 24/7. But I'm sure you still had a good time at Southampton, with that being said.
I did.
Yeah, if we talk about the experiential bit, the summer project, and then maybe just tell us a little bit about your life at Southampton, your social life here, what you saw when you were here, because I know you had some hobbies and interests that you've talked about before. I'd love to hear more about that. So, yeah.
Yeah, so, the summer project, it was interesting, to go back through. It was a very competitive process, by the way. We had to interview with companies, and it's something I hadn't done in a long time. So, I had to kind of, dust off the CV and get back in that mindset. And, as many, I think there was 60 projects, but, not everybody wanted an external project fairly. But there were more students than there were projects, so it was competitive. Now, going through that process, now here's a group of people that are your peers that you're now competing right against what you want. So, as I shared with a lot of other people, here's your first taste, right, of something you'll experience even inside a company, right, which is, hey, you might have been a peer of somebody for a very long time, and be faced with, you both want this new role, and now you're competing against each other. So, I ended up getting a project with TUI, which is the tourism company. It was the one that I wanted. Now, admittedly, there were a few things that I had a little bit of a competitive edge for my professional background that I used to my advantage. One of them was, at the end of the conversation, I just flat out asked them, is there any reason why you wouldn't select me over anybody else here? It gave me the opportunity to address any concerns, but also it was more of a closing, approach on my side to get what I wanted. And so the reason that I wanted TUI was, one, they were in Luton, so it allowed me to go live in London for the summer. But they had a customer journey, right? And it was to measure components of the customer journey, both from a marketing standpoint, but from an operations standpoint, from a financial standpoint, and help them identify what the attributes are in this journey that can influence rebookings, right? So it had a direct impact, right, to their revenue. I can't get into the numbers because of non-disclosure stuff, but
sure.
Years ago, but a 1% change, right, in terms of rebooking was a massive number for them, right? 1%. Especially when you're, a billion-dollar firm as they were. I do know that they've recently, gone through some challenges like many hospitality and tourism companies. But that experience was great. And so there's kind of 2 points. One is I embedded myself into the company as if it was my full-time job, right? I got up every morning and I went there Monday through Friday. That wasn't a requirement, but I treated it that way. One, at a level of seriousness, but also the second is that you become part of the team that way. And there's a lot of additional things that you learn outside of what I would say the purview of just the dissertation and the report, right, that had to be written for them. For me, it was seeing the inside of how a British firm operated, and also, being able to compare my experiences to a U.S. firm. At the same time, I met a lot of great people and established contacts and network. And actually, the individual who was my project sponsor, he and I are personal friends now. We stay in touch and frequently. And when I'm back in England, we always go out and have a pint. So, it was a very powerful experience. At the same time, I saw other peers, in their projects kind of experience some very challenging things. And so I kind of smiled, and to them, it was like the world is over, right? I've got an analytics dissertation due and I have no data. Or, hey, the person that was my project sponsor resigned. And I was like, well, welcome to the real world. And so, I shared with them, you're actually better off than somebody who's getting a project that things are going smoothly. And the reason is that you've now been handed a challenging situation. How you deal with this and come out the other side and become successful now becomes your story to come back and tell when you're interviewing for a job. And I think that to me, these were the things that I could bring and share with people in my cohort. They helped me get through some of the math that I hadn't done in 20 years. So there was a good balance of partnership and friendship there.
A good dynamic. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I guess, going back, what Rob was talking to you earlier about in the conversation, Jason, your very early formative years with your mum being a sort of guiding light in your life, and the challenge she was able to surmount and take you to where you are, at the moment. So it's clearly that sort of that ability to kind of face adversity and look at that as a formative part of your journey. I think that's absolutely fascinating. Very interested that you chose TUI. I have a professional background in the travel, tourism, and hospitality industry. So I could talk to you for hours on that on a separate note. That's really, really, and it sounds to me like you had a fascinating placement, and you actually didn't just treat it as an internship, you actually embedded yourself within the culture of the organization. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely. Yep. And that doesn't happen, by showing up one day a week, right? It was consistently, Monday through Friday, when they left at, 6 p.m., I left with them, I didn't leave 3, right? So, and over a period of time, it was, hey, there's the guy over in the corner working on some project to, hey, let's go to lunch together. You're part of the team. And it was changed over a period of a couple of weeks. And, that wouldn't have happened, right, had I not shown that level of interest, but commitment, right, to the project.
Absolutely. And just out of interest, what for you in terms of how the project brought to life your study and how the study fed into that dynamic between the classroom and the world of practice, how did that play out for you when you were at Southampton? Oh,
I mean, it really brought the culmination of everything together. As I think through, each of the modules, right, each one of those was a brick, right? But in and of it, right, it didn't build a house. Whereas the project now said, okay, which bricks do I need to build this house? But how do I need to put them together? And right now you're also dealing with the challenges of the practical and the applied, right? Which is, in the lab, right, the bricks were kind of pre-cut, right? Now you're having to make sure that you're sizing things up right, and doing this, right, in an orderly fashion, because, the dissertation does have a deadline against it, and getting to your results and conclusions. And there were some challenges very early, right, that, it's the first time I had dealt with a data set that large. And, I kept refining the model, right, down to the point where I'm like, yeah, I got like 2 variables left and like a 90. I'm like, it's like overfitting the models. I'm like, I got to go back to the beginning. And it was only supposed to be, one. So TUI, as you know, has many brands, right? And it was supposed to be, well, hey, we're going to look at this one brand. Well, the data set was for all brands in the customer journey. So, I had to segment this out. And then, I started looking at comparisons between the different brands, and then each brand, so kind of a horizontal view and then a vertical view. So it turned into like 7 projects in one. So those were the types of things of like, now how do I deal with that? And those were, like I said, practical things. Now, for me, I had my prior background to kind of rely on from what I would say the project management, the scope management, stakeholder management. I was able to bring that to bear. There were others, right, in the cohort, but again, even during our dissertation work, where I was able to share kind of, hey, you're experiencing this in a company, or you're now having, a challenge, right, working with this person, try these techniques. Likewise, I'm like, crunching my head over here on this formula, and I'm like, what's your perspective on that? So it carried forward, right, out of, the classroom and into the project.
Brilliant. I love your kind of analogy of the bricks, and I'll give away my age category here, but another brick in the wall came to mind when you were talking, Jason. But I'll not use too many Pink Floyd references because the audience is too young. Really interesting. And you mentioned about your network and how you've kept in touch with the guys at 2E, and tell me a little bit more about that as well, in terms of what Southampton gave you from that sort of, broadening your horizons, that sort of global network, and seeing people coming into the course from very different backgrounds, potentially to yourself.
Oh yeah. So, kind of to summarize, when I went into it with like 3 goals. I wanted to get a distinction, right? Just the academic success, wanted to build a global network and maintain friendships. A lot of that was for different perspectives and ideas. And then, the third part was adventure for me. And so I'm a bit of a World War II history buff. And so obviously there's a lot of history right in Southampton and England overall. So I used a lot of that time to travel and see places of, historic significance. And then one of the big trips was over to Normandy, and as an American to stand on, Omaha Beach is a really, really big deal. I used a lot of that time to kind of, what I would say, check off big bucket list items that I had always dreamt of doing. And now I was in a place where I could do it. But I will share that, the work and the cohort that we built very early on, there was a group of us, and that each person brought something powerful, right, to the group. For me, it was, hey, I've had business experience. I know how a lot of these things have played out, whereas others had, different, backgrounds related to whether it was mathematics or life experiences that they could share for perspectives on projects that we were working on. And I found, right, just like any team, right, everybody is bringing something there, and there's uniqueness in everybody. So there was a group of us, and we kind of bonded together, and we moved through. So we would sign up for some of the same, electives, and go through, the projects together, because one, there was trust, right, established, but everybody was bringing something to the table, and it was a fun group to work with. And, like I said, many of us are still friends today, even after we went the other way. But one thing, and I think I mentioned this in our earlier conversation, was something very unexpected happened to me during this. And it was something that I had never even thought of or anticipated, as much as I had set goals and direction. When we were kind of parting our ways, and everybody was going to kind of different corners of the UK to go work on their dissertation and embed with a company. One of the individuals within our cohort and friends, said, I just want to say thank you. And I was a little taken back, and I was like, for what? And this individual said, English was not their first language. And they said, anytime that I had an extra level of challenge, but anytime, right, that I needed someone to just verify or check, or, hey, what does I just want to make sure this is right. You always made the time to do it. And then it was, well, now I'm trying to find a job here. These are some things that I'm experiencing that are very different, right, in this system. What does this mean to you, and have you experienced this before? And so things that I thought were kind of just second nature of, hey, anybody would do this to help somebody. What I really didn't connect the dot to is that a little bit of this, I suppose, is having grown up in America and being sheltered from some of the broader perspectives in the world, is that a lot of students that had come to the university had come there based on their families pooling together money, or, it took a lot, right? In other words, the obstacles to get there were significantly higher than mine. The price of failure was significantly higher, right? And so they had a lot riding on their success. And so these little things, right, that I thought were so little were actually very big deal. In that moment, it didn't hit me until later, but that's when I realized, I go back to, my mid 30s and the leader that I was before I left. And I'll say I was a very production driven leader, which is get it done. And, this moment made me think about, wow, to be able to help somebody and give them either perspective or a story or insight that can help them overcome an obstacle, achieve a goal or a dream is one of the most powerful things that anybody can give. That changed me, right? It changed my leadership style over a period, because it now put me in a position where I'm like more of a people leader, more subservient leadership, which is, hey, if we've got something to achieve, what do you need to achieve this? What can I do to help you? And that's why I enjoy doing these sessions and continue to work with the university, because if there's something that I can do or say or share, right, that helps somebody, achieve a goal or a dream or achieve even something small, right, of removing an obstacle or roadblock, it's brought a sense of personal satisfaction that I never had before, right? And I bring that forward now into my life, both professionally and personally, on a level that never existed. That was probably the most powerful moment in that entire journey, more powerful than the degree, the adventure, or anything else that occurred there.
That's incredibly fascinating, Jason, and I'm sure just what you've said will be of immense benefit to our audience who are listening. I'm sure on the edge of their seats as we're talking, and it's a very humbling story, I think, to share. And I think, I love that term, the subservient leader, and how that shaped you. One of my questions when you were chatting to Rob earlier was, why did you make that big, quite, risky, albeit not as risky as some of your peers on the course? Nevertheless, there is a risk of, going from the world you were in to, the world of education on the other side of the pond, so to speak. But actually, I think you've really captured one of the key sort of watershed moments and how that has changed you as a leader. I think that absolutely fascinating, Jason. Thank you for sharing your experiences while you're at Southampton. I'm going to hand over to Rob now, because I think that's a really great segue into then kind of post University of Southampton and that sort of next phase of your inspiring journey. Thanks again, Jason.
So I think that that next step is you've come to the University of Southampton, you've been in the UK, and then what? So you have to sort of turn that into something. And obviously one of the things you've spoken about is it's shaped you as a leader. But what was the next step you took? You've got this analytics degree, or BAMS degree. What happened next?
Yeah. So, obviously as you start to, when you're in that summer project, you're focused on getting that done. But at the same time, you're also like, okay, I am unemployed. I do need to go back, right, and and bring this to bear. And how am I going to do this? And I have for me, I had a pretty expansive network in the Washington, D.C. area from the work that I had done. But, it wasn't just about taking a position or a job, but now it was really looking at what is the fabric, right, in the culture and the direction of a company, and do I fit there, right? And it, to me, it has to be a kind of an equal agreement, right, from both sides, which is I'm bringing value to this business and company, and likewise, it's going to be a place that I can be successful and thrive. And so, as I looked through different opportunities, the organization that I'm with today, Karsun Solutions, the founders of this company looked at the world very differently than I would say a lot of companies, in terms of, their structure of their company, but the culture of, empowerment, innovation, investing in their people, right, to drive these results. And I was like, this is a lot in line with some of the lessons, right, that I had learned. But their business, right, was very focused on IT modernization. So it took experiences I had in the past and brought to bear the new skills that I had learned at Southampton. So, their focus areas are cloud computing, more modern software development with, Agile and the DevOps fields, and then of course, data and analytics transformation and usage within the federal space here in the Washington area. So I said, and I had actually known them from, my previous life, and an opportunity opened up. And I said, this is the right home, not only because of the direction of the company, but because of their values and where I was, right, in terms of, not only my career, but my mindset of what I was looking for. So it became a nice fit, right, in returning home, from the journey I had taken there. Now, I think everybody goes through that anxiety of, right now I've got to monetize this and translate this into value. And it's something that I think the university, does a good job, right, with the liaisons, especially if people want to stay in the UK. My plan was to return home. So I started that outreach at a certain point, which was, hey, I'm wrapping this up. I'm starting to look at things. But for me, it was a pretty clear direction based on the components that I had just shared.
Now you're obviously quite senior in Karsun, and are you seeing anybody make the same mistakes that you were making prior to you coming to Southampton? How do you deal with that?
Well, same mistakes so let's say this, which is the fabric of the organization is very different, right? And like I said, so the company that I worked at before, not that we are not performance driven, meaning, we've got goals and objectives we have to hit. But the company that I was at before had venture capital involved. You have a board of directors. You report to bankers, and it was a no excuses, whatever you had to do. And I'll give you an example where, there was one year that, we were a couple of percentage points off from meeting our number. Well, in that situation, you let staff go, you recover labor costs, and you come out the other side. It's not very people centric. It's very profit driven. It's a very different mindset. An example here with this company is, the federal government a couple of years back went through a budget delay, right? And projects weren't funded. Well, the company could have taken the stance of, hey, either you're on furlough, right, and you're not getting paid until this is resolved. And they didn't take that stance, right? They said, let's take that time to train our people, to invest in certifications, to move our people forward during this time. And so if you can think about that, it's a very different structure and mentality. So in terms of that, I don't see the framework of making the mistakes that I made aren't there. But right within any company, I think in any young leaders that are growing up, it's making sure that they have mentors and coaches, right, that can share experiences and guide them. And they're doing a pretty good job of, as we grow as a company, it's not that we don't have growing pains, but making sure that the leaders that have had these experiences are able to start to build the next layer of leadership. And that's something that we're pretty focused on this year, right, which is building that depth in the organization so that all the leadership in the company today is not bearing all the brunt of this, but that we're also teaching the next layer below us. So it's starting to delegate some of the responsibility, but grow the next layer of leadership.
Okay, that's superb. I sort of sometimes get flashbacks in my role now to experiences that I've had in the past and how that should shape the way I'm going to respond in the present. And yes. I'm interested to know if you ever have those kind of similar experiences flashing back to Southampton or even before, and how that's then shaped the way you sort of tackle a problem now.
Well, I think there's two big points there. One is the flashback to my prior company and being bottom line driven. And it was something I had to recondition myself because, when the founders of the company would make certain decisions, I'd sit there like biting my nails, like, but we're going to lose money, right? But that was not their objective, right? Is obviously to make money, but it wasn't to squeeze every ounce right out of it as you could. So I had to unwire my mind of thinking, right, in terms of hey, it's okay. We're going to make money, and we might just make a little bit less than we intended, but we're doing the right thing over here. That was not the culture that I came from. So I had to unwind. The other part of it was from Southampton and that experience and change of leadership, right? Which was, I had a really, for me, it was when things were going wrong, it was just push everybody out of the way, take this over and get it done. Versus, now if something, if we get a little vibration in the car tire, remain calm and allow your leads, right, to learn from this situation and guide them, right, so that they have the experience and can deal with this the next time, which is a very different approach, right, than how I used to be. So yeah, very often, right, reflecting back and having to think, right, well, don't go to the default behavior that used to exist. Now that over time has been reconditioned.
Brilliant. So I'm wondering, we've got lots of people in the audience here probably wondering, like, where you think the future of leadership, management, but also your specialty in analytics, where that's headed as we go through the next 2, 5, 10 years. What's your vision for what it's going to look like moving forward?
Yeah, so on the leadership and the management side, I think everybody has seen this year the dynamic with COVID and the change. I have always been so you have leaders that have to feel like they have to have everybody, right, I call it butts in chairs, right, in the office. I've got control over things. To me, it's a very legacy mindset. I've always believed that I use the analogy of, that's a zoo, right? Everybody's controlled, everybody's in their cage. And I tend to think more of like a safari, right? Which is if you set the goals and objectives, right? You don't see the fence, but everybody knows what they're working towards. And it's a different thinking and a different management style. I believe that the people that can adapt to that, the companies that can adapt to that, and part of that is reducing office space, getting rid of, some of these heavy cost structures related to that, as well as distributing, right, some of their labor costs. And so, if I look here in the Washington, D.C. area of what it costs for a data scientist versus, if somebody's living in Kansas City, Kansas, there's a big cost structure there, difference, right? And so those that learn how to start to balance this, I think are going to become extremely competitive. The ones that don't, I think are going to start to fade in the sunset because I think they'll be crushed, right, by the more competitive companies that can do this well. So I think that requires a change in leadership and management approaches to be able to deal with if you have an organization that's 90% remote in terms of leading that organization forward. The analytics piece, when I was going to the university, big data was the word, and there was always big data around. It just became about the compute power, and then, right, I think a lot of that was marketing. We got back to the same problem that's always existed, which is how do I answer this business question quickly? And so what I'm starting to see now is typically where you had IT, you had all your data over here, and you had your data consumers, which is people that needed reports, or your data scientists. They were very siloed, and that caused a lot of delay and challenge in finding the right data, getting the right data to you, to be able to take that and make a decision in a timely manner. Data ops is now principles, right, that have come over from the software development and the Agile and the DevOps, which is, can I start to be more agile, be more automated? And what you're seeing is it's bringing the silos together, right? So now can I get to what I call, a speed to insight faster? Am I reducing that cycle time in terms of getting the data and actually using it to make a decision? That over the next 5 years, I think that those will start to become one, so that you are now able to get to those business question answers much more rapidly. But it's a total shift, right, in thinking and approach. When I was in school there, it was like the CRISP DM model. It was a very waterfall and systematic, do step one, do step two, do step three. Now things are becoming more agile in nature, which is, hey, can I just do this one piece and make it a little bit better than it was before? and iteratively over time, I'm now bringing this life cycle together and shortening that down. I think that will be a big factor. The AI component, I feel, it has a lot of heavy marketing around it, because when you get to it, they're machine learning models. And what are you actually using them to improve operations? And I believe the answer now will say yes. We're actually able to embed and get results. So I think as that happens more and the experience there comes out of it and the lessons learned, we'll see more of that at scale, in continuing to really drive, what people are calling AI, more into an operational component.
I think it's fascinating to see your separate views on both of these areas. If we go back to the people's bit,
Sure,
Jason, and just picking up on a thread that you threw out earlier in the presentation, where you said it's not necessarily you have to be the smartest or the strongest. You just need to adapt quicker. And I'm wondering, with the savings that companies will hopefully make from a shift to a work from home culture, or certainly a movement in that direction, how do they invest so they get a similar level of productivity, and where do you see that going?
So I haven't had a chance to look at all of the, I guess, studies over the last year, but I have read kind of summaries that on one side they say, well, productivity has actually increased. On the other side, it's like, well, yes, well, productivity has increased. It's come at a different cost, right? That people are working longer hours because they're sitting basically in front of their computer all day and not getting out. So, is there a burnout risk that's there? I believe that that middle ground has to be found, right? So, like our company, we're not going to go back in the office full time. We're reducing our footprint, but we're having areas where, we schedule time and we can go in with our teams, and am I there 1 or 2 days? I'll probably be there 2 days a week. So there'll be kind of this hybrid approach. Now that cost savings that we'll take out of there, for us being a services, in the services industry, I mean, if you look at I'm just making up a number here, if we're going to save, $1 million from that, well, now we can take that and reinvest it into development of capabilities and solutions, right, for our customers and market. And whether we decide to either use that to expand our market or penetrate deeper in, instead of having to go get outside capital, it exists right there. So you become leaner and then reinvest that money. Now, product companies and other types of structures will, I think, do something similar. But it's where do you invest that, right? Because you now have that as opposed to having to go out and borrow money for growth.
Brilliant. So obviously we've got alumni, people who are working in industry now. Some of our students are here and they're looking at making that shift into industry. What's your kind of advice to these people going forward with slightly different and nuanced approaches for both?
So I'm sorry, can you repeat what was the question again?
Yeah, so we've got students in the audience who are looking to make that transition into the world of work.
Mm-hmm.
But then we also have people in the audience who are in work and maybe looking at that next role. What kind of advice can you give to the audience, even if it's slightly nuanced and different between the two, that will help them sort of land that perfect job that you've been able to achieve?
Oh gosh, that's a really hard question. If I look at it from a student's perspective and it's the first time to get a job, I think it's a very different landscape and the competitiveness. I hate to put it this way, but it's get your foot in the door, right? And it may not be the ideal opportunity, but it's starting to build experience. I feel like it's land on the beach and then you have maneuverability of where you may be able to go. It could be within that company. At the same time, you may find out, what I always say is you don't know what you don't know until you've experienced it, right? Where if you've never been inside, if you've been in the academic track, getting inside a company and getting some experience, you'll start to learn the things that you like and don't like. And I think that very much, if you reflect, that leads you to your next opportunity, and you know how to look and assess a company a little differently. Being the more mature student and having a few years of experience already under your hat, I think you already have that reflection, right? Which is, I know the things that I like, I know what I didn't like, I know why I've come back to school to rearm myself, and to be a little bit more laser focused in the next step of their career and what they want to do.
Yeah, brilliant. But this is the perfect time to shift maybe to the questions. Do you agree, Philip?
Absolutely, Rob. I think, just what Jason was saying there about the reflective piece, I think that's incredibly important advice, isn't it? Because students, it's so easy to get on a railroad, but I think that ability to reflect, absolutely. Jason, there's an interesting point from Louise, because you were saying earlier with COVID and people working on Zoom and, working remotely and so on. Louise has asked the question that, and you can probably see her message in the chat, but she says that people working in different places presents commercial challenges. And she uses the example of, if you're working in different countries, how do you manage things like reporting obligations, permanent establishment issues, which she's referred to, tax compliance, etc. So I guess those are some of the pragmatics around, a dispersed workforce and remote working. Any thoughts on that, Jason?
So I think the first thing I'll say is, a dispersed workforce is nothing new. If you look at, the last 10 years, I know at least in the US, right, we went through this phase where all of a sudden we started offshoring, right? A lot of technical resources, call center support, all of the challenges related to logistics and managing that, had to be, worked through, as well as cultural differences. There were a lot of things that people realized real fast, which is it made sense from a bottom line, but hey, now I've got other issues, right, in terms of how to manage this. So I think this has a lot of similar attributes to it. Now, the difference is instead of having whole teams, maybe in certain places, you've got individuals. So the dispersity of it is much greater. So, I think there has to be some structure and some logic to it in terms of how management approaches it, and creating alignment. If it's that follow the sun model to some degree, you've got to at least create some kind of regions and zones. And I kind of think of that in a manufacturing way, right? Which is, if it's daylight here and we're working on this, there has to be some handoff point and transition for the teams that are going to pick it up in the evening, and that stuff has to be thought through and well planned. On the localization piece of, if I live here and I'm working there, I am not a tax expert. I don't want to make any statements there that could get anybody in trouble. But we're dealing with those issues ourselves here, which is, we've got people that are like, hey, I'm if I can work remote, I'm gonna spend 3 months in Florida, and then I'm gonna go spend 3 months in Colorado and go skiing in the winter. Well, that comes with complexities, and so I think the only thing is that realize that that's there, and if that's the approach that you want, there's always a point that I say that there are experts, whether it's an attorney, CPAs, that is their job, and it is worth paying them for that hour of guidance, because if it's a $150, $200 to get the guidance to not make a wrong step, that's better than getting a bill from the IRS that said, because you made these mistakes, you owe us $5,000. So that's what I say: seek out the proper expertise, and plan it, right, as opposed to finding out what happens afterwards.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just have one quick question. I'll hand back to Rob. Jason was waiting to see, and
Sure.
If there's other messages coming in the chat, that would be great. But coming kind of full circle, because you'd said when you came to Southampton, one of your kind of really impactful experiences was your work with TUI, the project. I mean, are you then sort of following that through? Are you taking on students and internships, and are you sort of giving other students experiential opportunities at Karsun where you are right now?
We do, and we do have what's called our KIC, which is our innovation center, and as part of that, they bring on interns every year, and there's kind of two different tracks. During the summer, for graduate students, they do set them up with projects on kind of a revolving basis. There's always, an intern track where they're able to support some of our programs. Now, one of the constraints that we have, obviously, is we do support the U.S. federal government is one of our primary markets. That does require, certain levels of, clearance, to make that happen. However, right, even that being said, from a corporate standpoint, some of the things that I've done with the university in the past is, I came there a few years ago and we did a hackathon. It was quite fun. We took open data, right, on U.S. spending and looked for patterns and trends, right, that were there, and presented that back and gave awards. So, while that wasn't really an intern experience, it was an experience, right, to apply what was learned. And it wasn't a competitive situation, right? There were different teams trying to find different insights, and you only have so much time and you're under the clock. It was great fun. So we try to do other things like that as well.
Brilliant. Jason, it's been great to talk to you. I'm going to hand back to Rob now to bring things to a close, but thank you very much for your time today.
I think thanks, Philip. I think the brilliant thing about stories and storytelling is that there's little messages and little nuggets that different people take away from somebody's experience, someone's story. And Neil Reynolds has made a really nice point here, which is that he's taken away from here that, career is a part of life, and not career is your life message from your story.
It took me a while to realize that, though.
Right. And I certainly take that away from the message as well. I also, from your story as well, I also took, and every time I speak to you, I get the same message, is how open you are to having experiences, how, low you are in risk aversion, which is a great thing to be, by the way, that you're willing to take risks, but that you're open to having new experiences. And I'm deeply humbled by the story you tell about taking little lessons from your classmates that have changed and turned you, into a slightly different leader, which I think is fantastic. From our perspective, it's been a great honor to have you with us, Jason, and thanks for being our inaugural speaker, if you like. Do you have any sort of final words of wisdom for our audience, or any final words?
I guess, what I would share is everybody's journey is different, but the one thread is it's what you make of it, right? And I've always shared that you can go sit in a corner and do your work, and that be that. But to participate, whether it is, webinars or the university has a lot of speaking series of people. There's opportunities to get involved. There were even trips, right, to go, see some of the historical sites. Anything to become involved. There's always more to it than just what's on the surface, right? You never know who's going to be sitting beside you and you're going to get in a conversation with. So I'm always one to say, go all in. And I guess with that, I did, because the other thing that came out of all of this was, I met somebody in England. I'm engaged to her, and we're getting married, and she's in the process of moving over here. So you never know what may come out of it.
Absolutely. Congratulations, by the way, on the engagement.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Jason. Also, thank you behind the scenes to Miriam and Daisy for their terrific work. And also thank you so much from both Philip and I to the audience. We really look forward to making this a much more regular series, and we hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. Enjoy the rest of the spring. See you later, guys. Bye.
Thanks, Jason. Cheers, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, Rob.